Do you sometimes get overwhelmed by tier lists and pull for a character based on the gut feeling? Their numbers might be weaker, they might lack a dedicated disc set or flashy cutscene-worthy animations, but their playstyle just clicks with you, and you can't really explain why. The thing is, there are more to agents than just skill multipliers, yet not all features and quirks are highlighted by the game in the same capacity as damage output. Block is arguably the most satisfying mechanic in the game. Not only it looks and sounds powerful, but it creates a choice. Whether to pair an attack with another agent's defensive assist or handle it with a non-field agent's block. Both options are valid, and the correct one, if it even exists, depends on the state of the battlefield. Parrying builds more days, but blocking allows you to keep the attack string going, which at times might be exactly what you needed. Any agent that has some kind of blocking mechanic instantly feels much cooler. But when the built-in parry is taken further and benefits the agent in a special way, then it truly becomes a hidden gem. It is one of the less highlighted, but still important features of the game that elevates how some agents feel in a battle. Letting an enemy take control of the fight flow is becoming an actual signature mechanic for Rapture agents. All of them are rewarded for reacting to the enemy, being extra resource generation, higher retaliation damage, or instant perfect timing. The opposite side of the built-in parry is agents' ability to evade attacks by being agile. Agents with such skills are the ones that allow you to rule over the encounter. Yanagi, for example, can teleport through an enemy back and forth in her basic attack string. But some other agents like Alice or Miyabi are quite good at this dodging by attacking thing. In a similar manner, aerial combat has its advantages. In the game that doesn't have a jump button, being able to lift your feet off the ground can be surprisingly useful. Some enemy attacks have short height and can be avoided completely by timing skills that raise your agent up in the air. But some agents take this rare ability a bit too seriously. Yeshon Wan's moves are light and bouncy, but large in distance, with the camera barely being able to catch up with her. For me, her gameplay in general lacks engagement. One click of a button leads to an epic scene with blades summoned all over the field. It feels unrealistically effortless for any character, but most importantly, undeserved for me as a player. It is a big reason why I decided not to pull for her. But you might have made a different decision. Whether you prefer to overwhelm the enemy or meticulously consider every single of their moves, in the end, it's just different flavors of the same power of fantasy. And I appreciate that the game implements both equally, allowing us to have this comparison in the first place. Another less obvious aspect of Agent's playstyle, but the one that can significantly impact your battle, is targeting. With bosses becoming more and more active, the ability to cross the distance in one skill, or land an ultimate, starts to matter even more. You can't assume an agent's range just by their weapon and playstyle. Agents equipped with firearms, like Pulcra or Trigger, on paper should have no problem attacking an enemy at a distance. However, in practice, their ranges are quite average. On the other hand, some agents who mostly engage in close combat, like Sunna or Vivian, are actually quite good at hitting enemies from the distance. You've probably already picked up on some abnormal ranges. Yanagi is known for being able to teleport to an enemy with her X special, while Dialin's inconsistent targeting was a point of discussion for a brief moment at her release. On average, an agent is able to hit an enemy within 4 tiles, but some agents are less flexible. Anton, Ben, Karin, and Leiter share the last place for struggling to hit an enemy that is standing further than 1 tile. It is less of a problem for DPS agents, as most of them can afford to focus their damage within the stun window, when an enemy is guaranteed to stay in one place. But it becomes quite an issue for someone like Leiter. Shorter range of his attacks certainly fits his boxer theme, but in an actual battle, he is slightly more disadvantaged compared to other stunners. It is his job to build daze on an actively moving enemy, but his immobility forces him into a swap playstyle, where you would opt to use his skills and ultimate mostly after entering the field through defensive assist and staggering the enemy. That reduces his utility by a bit, making him a less comfortable option for a non-field stunner and close to unusable for fighting bosses with high mobility, like Primordial Nightmare. But what about the other side of the spectrum? Rina's basic can target a goal one tile further than Yanagi's teleport. Harumasa can cross one more tile than Rina with his dash attack. But the top of this list is a tie between Nicole and Alice. Actual range for both cannot be determined in the practice mode. Nicole can shoot her field across the entire room, although she stops being able to target an enemy explicitly. As long as you point her in the right direction, the size of the field itself will correct any targeting errors. Alice, however, is truly extraordinary. Her charged basic correctly marks an object and teleports her across all this distance. While an actual battlefield doesn't require such extreme range, 1 extra second saved on running up to the enemy can be score defining in modes like Shiyu Defense or Deadly Assault. High attack distance is helpful, even more so on support agents that can trigger quick assist and move your DPS closer. Among supports, besides already mentioned Nicole, Lucia and Sonna have higher than average attack distance on their X specials, and become very comfortable picks for fighting more agile bosses. Targeting is not the only issue agents face when met with an enemy that stays far. A lot of ranged attacks can be dodged only, unless you have an agent with an evasive assist in your team. But when was the last time you felt compelled to bring one, specifically to deal with a certain attack? The answer is probably never, because there is no upside to ever go for an evasive assist. At best, it doesn't affect your fight. At worst, makes some encounters harder to clear. Vital View is a hindrance, since you can't meaningfully interact with enemy during it, and have to keep awkwardly hitting them, waiting for the time to speed back to normal again, while the actual timer doesn't bother itself slowing down. Would it be exploitable if it did? What do you think? Lore-wise, time manipulation is in a weird place in ZZZ. Some Holo survivors report traveling in the past, and Yanagi's appearances teased her ability to stop and rewind time, not to mention our protagonists. But the description on some enemies implies that any time manipulation effect is only an illusion caused by ether disruption, which would explain why timer keeps going normally when your agent is in a vital view state. But the lore explanation doesn't negate the fact that vital view as a mechanic right now feels bad, and it affects agents with evasive assists quite negatively. The only time slowdown that doesn't annoy me as a player is Alice's slight pause on her charged basic. With her, it doesn't feel as awkward as an evasive assist, because it is a proactive action rather than reactive. I think that it is telling that the last agent with evasive assist was Astra Yao, released over a year ago, who is often excluded from party streams anyway. Evasive assists definitely need an overhaul, and I hope that developers will figure out the way to make them less of a liability. Speaking of things that are also a liability, intuitively you would probably assume that agents with firearms are going to be the best at dealing damage at a higher range. So riddle me this. Here is Billy's basic attack sequence. Here is the same Billy doing way less damage. What is going on? At this point, you've probably seen the damage formula enough times to know that there is no distance component. And yet, we are seeing clearly that there is a damage loss, and quite a large one. What's even more interesting is that it is entirely agent specific, and there is no rule to determine which agent is going to be hit with this restriction. Agents that use firearms like Billy, Joyuan, and Trigger are obvious victims of this mechanic. But Pulchra, whose main weapons are steel guns despite attached blades, is not. In the same manner, Nicole and Hugo, In some attacks shoot from their briefcases, but don't suffer with damage reduction with distance. Lucy throws pigs at enemies. For all intents and purposes, it should count as a projectile, but it doesn't. Maybe minion-style agents aren't affected by this reduction, since their damage is technically close range. Wrong again. Rina's basic attacks, Acme Bamboos, hitting enemies up close, but she gets debuffed with distance quite noticeably. While Yuzuha technically has a ranged attack, but it is not affected by the distance. This effect has different impact for agents. Support's main contribution to the fight is not their damage, so losing some numbers here and there is not that big of a deal. Trigger is affected by this mechanic slightly more. With distance, she loses not only damage, but daze too. However, she is an off-field stunner, applying daze through aftershock attacks, so the daze loss from her initial hold basic is not that important. DPS agents such as Billy and Zhu Yuan are definitely losing the most. Not only you should keep track of stun windows, their resources or buffs like for any other agent, but on top of it, you have to keep in mind the distance to the enemy, otherwise the damage loss becomes very noticeable. This mechanic has no meaningful interactions in the game. The reduction starts at a very short distance, becoming more of a nuisance rather than an interesting feature. It would have been a different conversation if you could shoot enemies in the open world section from afar. Then the safety aspect might have been worth it, but enemies notice you at a larger range, preventing you from cheesing the encounter. It is worth noting that the last ranged DPS with this mechanic is Harumasa, whose basic attacks are done with a bow and are subjected to the distance debuff. But his main source of damage are dash attacks that allow him to cross the distance and ignore this flaw completely. Arya, whose ultimate is also a bow attack, avoids having to question whether she has this mechanic or not by moving closer to the enemy, so damage reduction with distance for now seems to have become a thing of the past. That's not all the hidden numbers that affect agent's performance. If I were to ask you to evaluate an attack or a stun agent, you would know very well where to start. Attackers depend on damage multipliers on their skills, and their offensive power grows with their attack and crit stats. Stun agent's ability to stun an enemy directly depends on daze multipliers on their skills, and base impact value. These numbers alone don't make or break the agent, but they work for a quick assessment and are easily accessible in the game. The same cannot be said about anomaly agents. Here is the exercise for you. Who out of the 3 physical anomalies will be able to hit the most assaults if they were only allowed to use their full energy bar and unique resource? For this test, I brought their anomaly mastery as close to each other as possible, and removed W engines with passives that help with anomaly buildup. Starting with Jane, full energy on her comes to 2x specials that don't fill a full bar on their own. If we bend the rules for her just a little bit, and get a couple of basics in to fill the passion stream and perform a Salcow jump, she'll be able to get 1 assault. Piper has no special resources to help her out, but her X special spin is long and powerful, and she easily hits 2 assaults with it. Alice starts with her charged basic attack ready, so at least 1 anomaly attribute is in her pocket. Her full energy bar is enough to not only fill anomaly gauge for a second assault, but also her blade etiquette again, allowing her to hit for the 3rd time. All that raises a question: why is there such a big difference? It is the same full energy bar, same enemy, and their anomaly mastery is within acceptable margin of error. But when we take a look at the skill descriptions, we can only see damage and daze multipliers. In reality, each skill has a hidden anomaly buildup multiplier. If we were to make top 3 agents with the highest anomaly buildup on their ultimate, we would get Arya 1st, Miyabi 2nd, and Piper 3rd. It makes some sense. Arya is a stun-dependent anomaly, so it is important for her to apply corrupted status as fast as possible. Miyabi is an Anomaly Void Hunter after all. And for Piper, it makes up for her kit lacking special resources. Surprisingly, if we take a look at X specials, top 3 agents with the highest buildup when adjusted for energy cost are not all Anomaly. Dialin is holding first place by far, and if you have played her, you've probably noticed that she heals assaults more often than other stunners do with their attribute. Piper is the second, while Seth and Ithari share the third place with their enhanced versions of the skill. To come back to our physical anomalies, hidden multipliers in their cases are dictating the playstyle. Jane has some of the highest buildups in the game on her dodge, making her a field-hungry agent, perfect for dealing with aggressive enemies. Alice has smaller multipliers on pretty much all of her skills, except for her charged basic, which is the crown jewel of her kit, allowing for a more quick swap playstyle. Piper is an A-rank anomaly, so she has lower base stats, but her X special and ultimate multipliers are above S rank, making her a decent free-to-play option. But anomaly buildup is not the only thing that is affected by hidden multipliers. Energy, adrenaline and decibel gain, or even miasma depletion, are also agent-specific. In general, support, defense and stun agents tend to have the highest energy and decibel gain on their basics, while attackers the lowest. It seems only logical, considering that usually you would spend the most time on the field with your DPS. But not all agents fit these expectations. The highest energy region on basic attacks belongs to Karin. The lowest is currently held by Dialin, and it has to be taken into account for her build. Unlike other stunners, she has to go for all possible energy region sources. However, she wins when it comes to decibel gain on X special, being second only to Lucy. Is it fair, considering that Dialin herself is a huge decibel discount and has the highest days per energy spent? I guess since it is more difficult for her to earn an X special to begin with, it has to count. Decibel gain on chain attack sometimes might come in clutch for building an ultimate in the beginning of the stun, so it is no surprise that despite a couple of wildcards, the top of the list is dominated by DPS agents. Although the difference isn't that big, and most chain attacks fall within the same range. But 3 agents stand out for bad reasons. Dufufu, Alice, and Evelyn sit significantly lower. It is understandable in case of Evelyn, who can put out more chains than other agents, or Alice, whose main source of decibel gain would be her innate disorders. Yanagi with the same feature also barely fits within average range. Dufufu's low gain can be explained by other agents preferring chain attacks over hers. When it comes to low multipliers for agent skills, it is either because the agent uses said skill too often, or not at all. For example, when it comes to X specials, agents with the least decibel gain are Anton, Caesar, and Sunna, but neither of them cares that much about it, relying on their enhanced basic attacks more, and there, they are hitting numbers way above average. So the actual standout agents are not the ones with the lowest gains, but the ones that have lower than average multipliers on skills that they still want to use in a clutch, while the enemy is stunned or the timer is about to run out. Yoshungwan, Yanagi, and Miyabi have noticeably poor decibel gain on their X specials, so if you're rushing to use their ultimates, they might fall short compared to other agents. Rapture characters lack adrenaline gain on their attacks, but they have other sources of its restoration in their kits to compensate, compared to energy gain in other types of DPS. Did you notice this difference in practice? For me, it's not Rapture agents on whom I find it difficult to earn a next special, but supports. Despite higher innate energy region and specialized disc sets, sometimes it still feels like they need extra help. This is where I would like to ask you, when have you noticed that support agents stopped coming with energy restoration on their ultimates? Starting supports all had it, but when it comes to the recent ones, only Yutsuha has kept it. To me, it has changed how I use support ultimates. With Rina or Sokako, I would time the ultimate before the stun to stock up on some energy for bigger damage output. But Sona or Lucia's ultimates feel less impactful, and their healing feature doesn't offset the lack of energy gain. They serve more as a Miasma shield removal, which seems like a need of the second season, rather than lower flavorful addition. Now, when it comes to Miasma depletion, you would expect Yunquei Summit agents to be the best at dealing with the shields. But they aren't. Isuan is close in top 5, but the rest are sitting lower than the average. Sokako, Cess, and Corinne, all A ranks from the first season, have high Miasma shield depletion multiplier on their ultimate, but the best one is Sid Jr. Here's where numbers alone don't show the full picture. Agents have different effective ultimate animation lengths. Pulchra has the lowest damage and days multiplier, but she barely spends any time locked into her animation. Sid, who has the highest damage in her ultimate, and the most effective Miasma depletion, has one of the longest ultimates in the game. When adjusted for animation frame lengths, huge multiplier for Sid stops looking that unfair. When a chance to deal enhanced damage is limited by the stun duration, every second becomes important. Agile agents that support animation cancelling and swaps, like Miyabi, Alice, Evelyn, and others, feel like they are doing the most in the narrow time window. Not to mention that it leads to gameplay that looks impressive and flashy. A lot of extra layers of difficulty come from mastering these tighter rotations, dividing agents into those that allow for increasing their damage to perfection, and those who hit their ceiling faster due to less optimization opportunities. Animation length greatly affects the way a character feels. In fact, the whole idea of this video came from a long-time observation. As much as Yutsuha is an amazing agent, switching into her sometimes is painful. You never know if it's going to take a second to hit her X and swap out, or you're going to be stuck in her aftershock animation. Lucia and Trigger with similar off-field presence don't feel this sluggish, as they have much shorter aftershock animations. When paired with invincibility or Laxarov, animations can add or take away opportunities. Being stuck in a lone attack that doesn't provide invincibility frames can be fight-ending in modes like Battle Tower. But too much invulnerability leads to gameplay that lacks agency. Agents on release have less ways to skip enemies' attacks, but with time, inbuilt parries, long invulnerable animations, auto-dodges, and enhanced movement became quite the norm. And most new agents have at least some of this, if not all, in their kits. It leads to more varied playstyles, and the ability to choose the level of interaction you prefer in the battle. Do you agree that these little details matter? Was there something in this video that surprised you, or maybe something that didn't catch your attention before? Please leave your answer down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you soon. Bye bye!